Hi, this is Terry with Exactline Tools. We're doing a repair today on a silver Nissan pickup truck. This vehicle was damaged on the right side and includes the right front door, the right rear door, and the bedside, which we're looking at right now. We can see there's quite a bit of damage on the bedside. We can also see from another angle that it's quite extensive around the flare. Here on the rear door we can also see that there's quite a bit of damage below the style line and above the style line as well. Another picture showing that quite clearly here. The front door we replace. We've roughed out the rear bedside and we're going to start our repairs there. We can see that the panel curves this way and this way. We're going to use the number 3 blade and we're going to do a sweep across the center of this panel first, and then we're going to come back and do a sweep on the top and the bottom. We're doing our test sweep across the center to see how it feels, and it transitions across very nicely. We can see that by the unique nature of the blade that it can accommodate and reproduce the curve that runs from top to bottom, and it can transition across where the two planes join very easily. We start by applying our plastic filler in the area, in the center there of the damage. We're using a 75% body filler with 25% finished putty mix. This gives it a nice viscosity and makes it easy to transition across the damage with the number 3 blade. We're applying the plastic filler to the entire area, making sure that everything is covered so when we do our sweep we have a nice easy transition without any gaps in the plastic filler. As I said, we're going to use the number 3 blade. It's the most flexible blade and it will accommodate this curve nicely. We're starting by doing our sweep right through the center of the damage as I indicated initially. We can see a little gap where the Bondo has separated there just before the flare. We should be able to fill that on the next sweep. We're getting closer there. We'll do a few more sweeps. We're gathering the plastic filler from the edge of the blade and loading it at the front of the sweep, removing from the bottom there a little bit, adding a little more to the front of the sweep, and we're going to do our sweep across there, and we can see that this sweep looks really good. We'll do a few more, see if we can improve that a little bit. Transitioning across the panel is pretty natural there. We're removing the extra at the bottom outside the first area that we're working, removing it from the top as well. Now we're taking a finished DA and we're going to clean up the lower area where there was a little bit of residue left from the first sweep, knocking that down with 180 grit. We'll clean that up really well and we'll lightly go over the area that we filled initially, the center of the damage. I'm going to peel back this tape. It can be a little difficult with gloves. I think I can get it. There we go. And we're going to sand up in this area, also preparing it for the next sweep. We're going to go over the area that we swept on the flare there and smooth that out a little bit so it too is nice and smooth and doesn't create any bumps or anything for the blade to go across. Smoothing it all down. Again, 180 grit is all we need. We're not shaping it at all, we're just smoothing down the surface, preparing it for the next sweep. We started by doing the center to give us a line that we can follow on the next 2 sweeps. Okay, we've got this done here. Now we want to do a sweep across the top and across the bottom, blending all of it together. So we're doing our test sweep, seeing how it feels coming across that. Feels real nice. And on the bottom, you can see I'm holding my left hand just in that area that we just created. Right, we're applying our plastic filler to the top of the repair, getting a nice nice covering of plastic filler in that area. We want to apply the plastic filler to every part of that area that we're going to sweep. We don't want to have any gaps in the plastic filler. This assures a real nice sweep across it. So again, with the number 3 blade, we are doing our transition, resting my hand into the area on the bottom that we've already swept and created a really nice shape. That's our control surface on the bottom, and which you can't see, that's out of the scene, I'm resting it on the bedside that's undamaged, just above, just out of the frame, as my second control surface. Again, we'll go over this with another sweep, see if we can get a really nice smooth sweep. This is looking pretty good. We'll remove the mud from the edge of the blade and apply it to the bottom of the repair. Again, I'm using that little blue line in the middle of the repair as my control surface on the top, and we will I'll be pressing my fingers on the edge of the blade right in that area to take on that shape and transition it across the bottom. Again, I'm positioning my fingers right there in that little blue area that at the top. Got a little extra there, I had to press a little bit tighter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the plastic filler from the edge of the blade, load it at the front of the sweep, as I'm doing right here, and I'm going to transition across it again with the blade, try to get a really nice sweep going there. That's looking pretty good. Happy with that. We'll remove the excess at the bottom and along the door. And we're going to apply a little bit there on the bottom just with the putty, with the spreader. Now we're buzzing it down here with 180 grit once again, coming across the entire area with 180 grit. We can see that it sands down relatively quickly. We're not shaping it, we're simply working the surface of the plastic filler. We've impart the shape with the blade. So this is just surface treatment that we're doing. In fact, that's all we do when we use the blade, is surface treatment and sanding the back of the flare right through here. We're still just roughing it out with the plastic filler, knocking it down a little bit, not getting too worried about anything in terms of shape at this point. As you can see, there's very little sanding that we've done thus far. No shaping other than the application of the plastic filler, and the shaping is dictated by the blade. Knocking this area down a little bit here, which I applied just with the plastic spreader. Likewise with this area over here, just knocking it down a little bit, cleaning it up. Just take your time sanding it and working it a little bit, smoothing down the surface, getting it ready for the next step. We're going to blow it off, have a look at it, see what we need to do next. I can feel it. It feels really good. It has a great curve that transitions consistently down the panel. Now I want to repair this area right here, focus on it a little bit. We've got this done. So I'm going to take some plastic filler and I'm going to fill this area on the outside of the flare where it goes flat into the wheelhouse. Just applying this with the plastic spreader. It's a relatively narrow area. It doesn't require a whole lot. We've already established some good shape with the blade already. So we're just doing a sweep across here with the plastic spreader. We'll work this a little bit more until we have a nice finish that we can work with. Again, just transitioning over it a few more times here until I get something that I like. I'll not use the blade on it. The plastic spreader works fine for a narrow area like this. Now here I'm pressing the plastic filler into some pinholes and some rough spots in the plastic filler. I'm not allowing any of it to stay on the surface. I'm pressing it very tightly up against the panel to remove all of the plastic filler and push it down into the pinholes and any rough surfaces that are there on the panel in the plastic filler. I'll do this for a while. I'm looking it over closely as I do this, making sure that I'm filling all of the pinholes. This again is a very thin coating. I tried to press it very tightly to remove all of the plastic filler that lies on the surface and just press it into the pinholes. This will help me going forward. I won't have to worry about that in the next step. I've applied my dry guide coat. We're ready to start sanding. I'm using a flexible block. This is a spring steel block that curves. We're using 180 grit sandpaper. It curves to the radius of the panel, and I'm simply going to sand this, moving it, rocking it back and forth to accommodate the curve. This is a hard block. That is to say, it does not have any foam pad on it. It's simply a hard blade with 180 grit sandpaper attached to it, and it cuts very accurately. I use hard blocks on most of my repairs because they cut more accurately than any other block. You could do this also with a foam block. I just prefer the hard block. And I'm sanding it right up to the line that I've taped. I've used a scribe and marked that line before I applied the tape to correspond to that line that travels all the way around the wheel opening. It's a style line, and we want to keep track of that. We're not too concerned with it at this point. We just want to get it roughly in place. So I'll continue to sand this right up to where it joins into the other plane of the panel. And you can see that all of the light surface is the area that has successfully been blocked to shape. It looks real good. This is the first block sanding that we've done on the panel, and we're simply just working the surface of the plastic filler, knocking down the texture, sanding it down very lightly with the 180 grit, bringing it into shape. I'll continue sanding this for a while until we get the area completely sanded and we can see what we need to do next. It's feeling really good. Now we're going to move to the next plane, which is a curved surface. We're still using this flexible hard block. We're taking our time sanding. Again, we're using 180 grit, which is very fine sandpaper, but it has plenty of cut in it to knock down the surface fairly quickly. Because again, we're dealing with a shape that has already been put in place, and we're working the surface. knocking it down and blocking it out. You can see here it sands relatively quickly. We'll continue to do that across this entire panel. Because it curves from top to bottom, we are using this flexible block. Again, you could do it with a foam block. It's just a matter of preference. I will be sanding this entire area in the same fashion till we get it all knocked down. Blowing it off, having another look at it. It's coming into shape very quickly. We've only have a few minutes of sanding, I should say block sanding at this point, and we're nearly done with all the areas that are white. That is to say, they are in excellent shape at this point. We're just finishing them down with the block to make them perfectly blending into the surface of the bedside. I'm using another hard block. It's a short hard block, and I'm just kind of rocking it back and forth as I sand, finishing off these areas at the bottom of the bedside. I use a combination of various blocks, but most of them are hard blocks. I'll use some foam blocks occasionally when I need it. You can use foam blocks throughout the whole process if you like. Again, it's a matter of preference. Knocking the bottom of the bedside down a little bit here, and I'm going to finish it up with a foam block, a hard block. I'm going to sand it in a more conventional way just to assure that the panel has the correct shape on a horizontal plane. See here, it's sanding down very easily. We already had it with the flexible block, but this just gives me an added amount of assurance that we're on track for a perfect repair. I'll continue to knock this down until the dry guide coat is removed. Sanding it, as I say, in a conventional way on a horizontal plane. We're just going back and forth with it to make sure that it's straight along the length of the car. Blowing it off, having a look, continuing to sand. Again, if you look at the amount of time that we're spending sanding, it's rather a small amount of time, and considering that we're sanding it with 180 grit, we're nearly done with this job. All of the areas that are white have a perfect shape to them, so you can see we have very little left to do here. Sanding it up to the door jamb there. Blowing it off, we're going to have a look at it. Feels really great. We're going to take a foam block and sand this little portion at the bottom of the flare. It's just easy to get into with that, so we're going to knock it down with that. Spending a little bit more time with that, just finishing it off. Again, the foam block works great in an area like this. It's a small area that would be difficult to sand with anything but a foam block. Alright, now we're going to sand the area where the two contours transition into one another. We have the flare blending into the overall shape of the bedside. We're using a piece of round tubing that has a brass insert inside that holds it nice and round, and we're simply sanding that transitionary point from the wheel flare into the general shape of the bedside. I'm coming at it at a slight angle. I'm not just laying it in the curve and running with the curve. I don't want to reestablish any sort of curve. The curve is there. All I want to do is sand it until it blends seamlessly into the two panels. So I'm coming at it at a slight angle and just moving back and forth with it until all of the guide coat is removed. I have a little bit left at the top I'd like to knock down, so we'll work that a little bit more. It blends right into the style line, which you can see above that area that I'm working. Just about done with this panel. A little bit more sanding. There's a couple areas we want to finish. We want to put a little bit more effort into that bedside, but first we're knocking down the rear door, which in between sweeps I put some extra plastic that I had on this rear door. What I did was I masked off the style line and I did a sweep on the top above the style line and a sweep below it with the number 2 blade and a stiffener. I'll be demonstrating that on the next sweep here, but I had some extra plastic filler. I don't want to waste it, so I did a sweep there in between the work I was doing on the bedside. So we're knocking this down with 180 grit, just smoothing it out a bit and getting it ready for our next sweep. Again, all this sanding has been done with 180 grit. I emphasize that because you cannot sand a whole lot of material with 180 grit. It's basically just working the surface of the sweep that I just did, which has the basic shape, but the surface needs to be worked a little bit as we move closer to finishing the panel. So knocking it down here with the 180 grit, kind of blending it into the paint a little bit there. Again, a little bit more below the style line, just smoothing it out a little bit, preparing it for the next sweep. So what I want to do now is I want to do a vertical sweep where I'll be creating the overall shape of the panel to correspond across the style line. We'll do that with the number 3 blade, and then we'll do a sweep going like that down it to finish the bottom portion. So we'll start with a vertical sweep like this, and then we'll do I can do it from either direction, whatever feels right while I'm doing my sweep is what the sweep I'll choose. So here we go, we're applying our plastic filler. Again, we're using a mix of 75% body filler with 25% finished putty mix. This gives us a nice viscosity and makes it easy to make the sweeps with. Again, other factors that may contribute to the plastic filler sweeping nicely would be the temperature of the plastic filler also. So here we're doing our vertical sweep. We want to establish a good radius on the vertical from top down. When we get that, we will do our second sweep on the bottom portion. We've removed the plastic filler from the edge of the blade, and we're filling the lower portion of the door with a little bit of extra mud, so when we do our sweep, we'll be able to get a nice transition all the way down the panel. Here we have the number 1 blade. We could use the number 1, 2, or 3. We're using it with the stiffener. The one blade we had available, so we're going to use that right now coming down the door. I'm going to remove the plastic filler from the edge of the number 1 blade and load it towards the top of that sweep and transition down from there. The reason I'm only coming up this far is the area just in front of the style line as it meets the back of the door. There's a little area there that I don't want to disrupt because it has the perfect radius to it, joining the top of the door to the bottom of the door. Now we're peeling the tape off. This is important while the plastic filler is still soft. We want to maintain the accuracy of that style line, which I've carefully masked off, and I don't want to obliterate that line by leaving plastic filler on there to harden. At this point it's much easier to carefully remove it. I have a nice sharp line, as you can see. I'm lightly knocking it down now with the 180 grit, just buzzing along it here, smoothing it over. Again, you can see it sands off readily with 180 grit because we have a beautiful shape that we're working with. We just need to work the surface. I'm using my left hand there to steady the finished DA so it doesn't move around too much. Makes it a little bit easier that way. You can see on the style line, since we've sanded it a little bit at the edge, it has a nice sharp crisp line to it. That'll be very helpful as we go forward finishing this door around the style line. Knocking the bottom half of the door down a little bit, we can see that it too sands very quickly. It's looking really good. Continue to sand this down. Feeling really good at this point. There's a few little rough spots in the plastic filler, but the overall shape feels really good. Again, taking notice of how much time we've spent sanding, there's very little time at all we've spent doing this much. Blowing it off a little bit and having a look. We can see that there's a few little rough spots I want to fill, some pinholes, and tightly pressing a coat of plastic filler over it. I don't want to build the surface at all. I simply want to put a very thin coat over it that will fill any sort of pinhole or rough surface on the plastic filler. Doing the same at the top. There's a few little pinholes. If I get those dealt with at this point, I don't have to worry about them going forward. Once you have the initial shape with that the blade has imparted, doing this type of work over it is not a problem at all. You're not influencing the shape that you've created, you're simply filling any sort of imperfections that might be in the surface of the plastic filler. Again, 180 grit, we're knocking that down. Just a quick sand over it because we really don't have any build in terms of plastic filler that we have to spend much time knocking down. The process of doing a sweep, lightly sanding it, doing another sweep over it, is the process that we use here to build up to perfection. It's a different approach. The conventional way is to overfill damage and then to attempt to sand to shape. That's much more difficult than it sounds, and this process builds up to perfection through subsequent sweeps. This will give you the most accurate shape possible. Finishing up our sanding here, blending it into the paint area a little bit there and continuing to sand. Just about got that knocked down. Let's blow that off and have a look at it. Looks real good. I don't see any surface imperfections that I need to fill at this point. So we will go on to the next step. We've got a little bit right actually there. We want to fill a little bit. Again, another press coat in there just to fill some pinholes and slight imperfections in the filler. Quickly knocking it down and getting it ready for the next step, which will be our initial block sanding. We've applied our dry guide coat, and with 180 grit we're doing our initial block sanding. You can see here that it's knocking the guide coat off pretty quickly. A lot of the area is going to the lighter color, the white or the color of the plastic filler, pretty quickly. We can see that there is a low spot towards the front of the area that I'm sanding on the door there. An oval shaped dark area that will need to be filled after we're done blocking the entire panel. We can see here that there's another area. It's kind of an F shape right below the style line. We'll need to fill that as well. The rest of it that is white is has perfect shape to it. So we have those two areas there that we'll need to fill, and we'll continue sanding and see what else there is. Again, using a hard block, it will render a very, very sharp and accurate cut. When we finish block sanding with 180 grit, these dark areas that you see remaining are only a mil or two deep. They're very, very slight waves at this point, but we will want to fill them to make it perfectly straight. Blowing the area off and blowing the block off, paper, cleaning it up a little bit. So we have those two areas there. We'll fill later, and we're beginning our blocking on the top portion of the door. And it comes down pretty quickly. Changing angles of the sandpaper by flipping the block helps it cut a little bit quicker. We'll continue to do this for a couple minutes until we get this area blocked out. You can see this area is blocking out really nicely. There's very little dark areas remaining, so we're really pretty accurate on our repair up there thus far. Blow it off a little bit, clean up the paper, and finish the back side of that area, blocking it down, getting it finished off. It's almost completely blocked out on the top portion of this door. Very little left to do there. We'll finish the sanding and move on to the next portion. Again, I point out that the areas that have completely sanded white or a lighter color are completely straight and more or less flawless in terms of their shape. So there's very little left to do in those areas. We can see the whole top portion above the style line has perfect shape to it. Just lightly sanding over it a little bit more just to finish the area off. You can use a more coarse sandpaper. I don't recommend it because then you're potentially scoring the paint, which could create problems going forward. That area is done. We have a little fill in those two areas there. So we've sanded off the remaining areas and we've taped this area that curves at the back of the door. We're going to just do a little application of plastic filler there with just a simple spreader. No need to use the blade on this area. It's very narrow, about 1.25 inches or so. There's a style line that runs down this area that we've masked off. We're simply just filling this area and completing the repair on that portion of the door. You can see we have a lot of lines that we have to be aware of. The style line, the area at the back of the door as well. We're filling the two areas that showed a low spot here. We're going to just use the blade with the stiffener on it, transition across that area, removing all of the overfill. There we go. Now we're going to go forward and do the other area that's still a little bit low. Put a little plastic filler in there and use the same arrangement, stiffener on the blade, give a nice flat surface sweep. Alright, we're good there. We'll remove the tape. I'm going to lightly knock this area down at the edge of the rear door. We're just lightly sanding that with, again, 180 grit. That looks good. We'll lightly go over these two areas that we just did a sweep over. It's difficult to put plastic filler over a very slight low spot while you're doing a repair. You always seem to get too much filler and it takes forever to blend it into the existing repair. When you use the blade, you're removing nearly all of the overfill, so doing a fill on an area like this is much easier with the blade and much more accurate. Putting a little bit of dry guide coat just in the areas that we've worked. Everything else is already in perfect shape. So we'll start by sanding the edge of the rear door. In this area we're using a foam block, and I'm sanding the area that we already have established as correct in shape. I'm just knocking it down here up to the line that is a natural style line. We're going to sharpen this up a bit as we go, but at this point we're just roughing it into shape. We've scribed it with a pencil and we're blocking it. We've put a piece of tape along the pencil line so we can sand right up to the edge of that style line. Again, I'm just using a foam block. This damage in this area was minor, so we're not doing a lot of repairs. We're just smoothing the surface over to match the other repairs that we've done. Okay, we have that completely sanded. Now we're going to block off those two areas that we filled. Again, using the hard block with 180 grit, spending a little time blocking it until it is all leveled out perfectly. Changing the angle of the block here to cut it a little bit better. And working the other portion that we filled, knocking it down. We can see here that they've blocked off real nice, removing the tape in both areas. Still have this area to finish, and this little area back at the edge of the rear door. I'm going to take some Scotch-Brite and sand along the edge of that style line where the plastic filler meets the inside of the style line. We want to prep that so we can put a little bit of filler in there and connect the two surfaces together. So I'm using the small plastic spreader, and I'm just kind of putting a little bit just to bridge the area that I've worked into the undamaged style line area. There's usually a little line or a little gap or some inconsistency along that area after you do a repair like this, so I'm just blending the two together so it'll be a seamless repair right into the style line. So again, I'm filling it along the edge on the inside of the style line up to the area that I've worked already on the outside on the door skin. Just smoothing it across with the spreader, not getting too worried about it. I just want to fill that area at this point. careful to remove all of the plastic filler from the outside. That area is already complete and I don't want to add any filler to it. I want to keep it finished. Here we get into that little curve a little bit, and a little bit along the bottom here as well. There's a little gap where I created that line as well, so we're filling that also. Alright, I'm removing most of the plastic filler. There's just overfill sitting in there. It's just a thin area I need to fill, so I'm cleaning it up with a spring steel spreader that I have shaped into a curve. It tends to remove that plastic filler fairly readily while it's still soft. Now I'm taking a half curved soft block and I'm just lightly sanding that area just to get that area started in terms of sanding I need to do. Knocking it down with 180 grit and beginning the finishing touches on this rear door in the style line area. I'm careful not to sand that area in there. I don't want to drift off a bit and start sanding that paint, because even a few strokes on the paint with 180 grit can create a wave or an inconsistency in the shape. So again, I'm knocking the top portion of it down. This is just getting this area started in the sanding process, and removing as much of it as I can without sanding the paint down much, because the paint has the shape that we already want and I don't want to change that at all. So I'm careful not to sand too aggressively. And into the curved portion of that style line at the end of it. And I'm sanding this portion down, which I just put a little bit of plastic filler on there to help with that line. I'm taking the scribe and putting a pencil line very accurately at this point on that curved area at the edge of the rear door. I'm now placing some masking tape right along that pencil line. That will help me stay within the shape I want. Now here I'm sanding a little bit on the front door. We've replaced with a used door, and I'm getting an accurate line here and here that I'm going to draw from to create the lines on the rear door. So I'm using the straight edge aligned with the front door, and same with the top of the style line, aligning it with the front door. Now I'll sand the insides and now the outside, reversing my tape and finishing up this repair. We'll sand right up to the line, right up to the pencil line. Again, I've already sanded the inside portion of it and reversed the tape. And I'm just finishing the outside, sanding it right up to the pencil line, and the tape helps me not to sand beyond that. This is the portion where you really dial in the shape regarding the style line. It'll give you that perfect shape that'll match the adjacent panel. Here I'm doing the top of that style line. You can see I need to just take it down a little bit until I get to the pencil line or to the tape line. Continue sanding that until I get that finished. You can see here as the lines are very accurate. We've sprayed it with some wax and grease remover. Got a preview of what it's going to look like. Now we can see here, since it's out of paint, that we have a really beautiful repair. We're going to do some close-up looking at this. We can see the style line matches the front door style line perfectly. The plane of the rear door matches the plane of the front door perfectly. You can see the flare has a perfect radius running across it, along with going forward on the bedside lines up perfectly with the rear door in terms of its plane and contour. We see the line along the rear of the door has a perfect shape as it did originally. Again, we're taking a look at it in some other lighting arrangement here, and we see that again we have a beautiful repair that rivals a brand new car. If you're lucky, not all new car panels fit together perfectly, but because we were able to work this panel, we can adjust it any way we like. Again, looking down the side of the car, we have the same reflection across that door panel. It matches perfectly with the front door. Here, if we look at it, we can see the style line. Again, connects perfectly with the rear door. All the planes and contours are consistent with what the car had originally. And once again, outside, some different lighting. Thanks for watching.